Hello, this is Retro Marky back behind the camera for video 2 of the Dragon 32, which is now reduced down to its component parts. Now I have some good news and some bad news. I guess the good news first. The good news first is that this is actually all working and booting. So last night I took this to my tech club and borrowed a friend's power supply that was a known good one, booted it up, tested all the keys, ran a very simple basic program, and that's all fine and dandy. Before I did all that, of course, besides the checks I showed you in the other video in part 1, well, what you can do with this is you can test the resistor here for voltage, make sure that's at 5 volts, but the most important thing is to test these two voltage regulators. So we've got a 12 volt here and a 5 volt here. This is the 12 volt, which is a 2812 voltage regulator. Pin 1 is input, pin 2 is ground, pin 3 is the output. So you need to look for your 12 volts output on pin 3. I'll be really careful with this because it's really easy to short things together. This one here is quite tricky to even get the probes down into, but it's a 7905 5 volt regulator, and be careful because this one is input on pin 1, ground on pin 2 and output on pin 3. So be really careful, and always check online before measuring voltage regulators to make sure you have got that you are measuring the right pins and looking for the right voltages. So I checked those very carefully, very quickly. The main thing I did though is check the voltages coming out of here. So I mean, to be honest, you could skip this unless you think there's an issue. Good idea to do it, but if you want to do a quick test, you could always go straight to the ribbon cable here, because that's sending all the different voltages needed by the PCB. And so the best thing I recommend is to test the voltages coming out of here. Now bizarrely it goes 1 to 9 back to front. Pin 4 is the ground and 5 is also a ground, so you want to use one of these. You could pick pin 4 for example. Then if you measure pin 1 here, you should have plus 12 volts. You have your plus 5 volts here on pin 2, minus 5 volts on pin 3. There's also another 5 volts on pin 8 here, which is a supply to the RF modulator. So besides that, you might be asking yourself, well, Retro Marky, why on earth do you need all these different voltages? Well, I'll tell you right now. So these RAM chips here make up the RAM of the system, and they're all 4116s, and they do need these voltages. On pin 1 of these, all of these, pin 1, if you want to measure that, that will be your minus 5 volts. On pin 8 you have plus 12 volts. On pin 9 you have plus 5 volts, and 16 is your ground pin. So the RAM is kind of odd, and that I think explains some of the oddities of this conversion circuit here. So what we have is 28 volts AC and around 8.5 to 9 volts AC going in from the transformer itself, the one I showed in the last video, and then this circuit here converts everything to give you the plus 12, the plus 5 and the minus 5, which is needed for the RAM. If it wasn't for this RAM here, if they had used more modern RAM perhaps, or maybe that's all they had at the time, or I don't know why they used this RAM, but they did. But normally with something like the Commodore 64 you wouldn't have any of these negative 5 voltages needed, and the shame with that, the pity now, is it's very difficult to replace the transformer and just go, I mean the ideal thing would be to directly go in using DC voltages from a DC power supply, but of course getting minus 5 volts DC and plus 5 and plus 12 is a little bit tricky. You could build circuits for this, but it would get messy. Now the reason I'm telling you this is because unfortunately the bad news is the transformer for this is completely gone. I did power it on yesterday, and the thing is I hadn't actually felt it or noticed any heat, but I placed it on here to test it, test this quickly yesterday, and it got to 50 degrees centigrade within a minute and started to smell absolutely horrendous. So I immediately turned it off, and in fact I got so paranoid about it, it was getting so hot and not cooling, that I took it outside and stored it to cool down. It took about an hour to cool down, and even the next day it still smelled horrible. You can buy a new coil for it, but that's about £30. So really the best thing is to try and source a replacement original power supply, because getting in the voltages from AC is going to be tricky when you need more than just the 28 volts. It looks like one pin's 14, another pin's 14, another pin is 8.5, so that's kind of fiddly. There are ways around this. You could use an ATX power supply, and then build a circuit to convert +5 to -5 as well, but it's going to become quite a messy job, and you're going to have a bit of a messy kind of system. So unfortunately I can't test any of the games and show you. I did try last night, but the tape recorder unfortunately doesn't work. I did clean it out with isopropyl and all the heads and everything, but nothing is working. Could be the belt needs changing, but to be honest, at this juncture I don't want to do any more work yet. Ideally I'd like to change the capacitors in here and do a few other things. I did put some protective tape under here because this crystal, if you push it down, can easily ground and you'll get distortion. The picture also is not great. It's usable through RF, but ideally I would want to use a composite cable, and it might be, if you do have a system, worth insulating this a lot better in case it accidentally gets pushed down or whatever. But at this moment I'm not going to do anything because I need to contact the owners and tell them, look, to be honest, you're going to need a new transformer, which is about £40, and whether it's worth their while I don't know yet. I have tried to source a modern replacement. There's none available. I've looked on eBay for second-hand ones and there's literally none, and the ones that have sold have been expensive. So unfortunately, poor Dragon, I won't be playing you over Christmas after all. But on a happy note, I've got some Commodore 64s coming for repair over the Christmas season, so I should probably work on those next and put this to bed for a while and see what the owners think we should do with it next, because as it is, it's a working system without power supply, so I don't know what that's going to be worth to anybody on eBay, because it is going to be sold on. And yeah, okay. Retro Marquee out.